If I'm talking to a 30-year-old, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, tell me, if you're to pass away today, I want you to tell me who's sitting in the reserved rows at your memorial. I want to know who's in row 1 and who's in row 2. There's a rope, a banister that says reserved. And those are for the people that your loss will be significant because you're the only you. You're the only first son. You're the only older brother. You're the only husband or the only wife. You're the only dad. You are the only to those people, usually in the first 1 or 2 rows. And what I want you to do is I want you to now tell me, what would they say about you if they're attending your memorial today at 3:30 p.m.?
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I'm so glad you joined us. And if you're new here and you haven't subscribed, make sure you do that. You'll never miss an episode. And we have some incredible guests. Today's guest is multiple best-selling author and leadership coach, legendary leadership coach, Daniel Harkavy, and we're going to talk about what you need to know as a young leader to become the best at what you do, including, do you want to talk about your funeral even when you're young? And actually, he says you should, and we'll explain that and a whole lot more. Today's episode is brought to you by Overflow. So when it comes to giving at your church, do you wish it was as easy as simply tapping your phone for Apple Pay or contactless payment? Well, what if it could be with Overflow plus Tap? You can get all the latest by going to overflow.co/Carey and get started today. And then we're also brought to you by Belay. Well, Belay wants you to stop getting caught in the weeds and start delegating, and they want to help you get started today. They offer some of the best virtual assistants and social media managers and accountants in the business. And if you want some help with your ministry or your leadership, they would love to help you. And to help you get started, they've got a book called 24 Things You Can Stop Doing Today. And you can simply get it by texting Carey, my name, to 55123. That's Carey to 55123. And now today's conversation with Daniel Harkavy. Daniel, long overdue. Welcome to the podcast.
Carey, it's a privilege, and it is long overdue. I've been circling around your name for at least a decade, maybe 2. So it's great to have the privilege to connect with you today.
And likewise. So I want to know, because you do so much in leadership these days, when in your life did it first dawn on you that you might be a leader?
It's a story of a bit of shame as well as impact. So I was a young man, and I'll just call it maybe even a before teenage boy. Yeah, it was probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere in that zone. And Carey, I was just naughty, man. I was an awful young man. And that's a whole story in itself. And if we go down that road, your listeners will think differently of you. So we'll stay away. But I was with my extended family, and I had my mom's first cousin who was like an aunt to me. And I'd been doing things. I was the oldest of all the cousins, and I was always causing trouble. And I remember being in her kitchen, and I remember what she was preparing, Carey. I come from a Jewish family, and she was making a Jewish meal called matzah brai, which is matzah in eggs, and it was a breakfast. And I can just remember it. I'm standing there in the kitchen, and I just gotten in trouble. And she looked at me, and she said, Daniel, she said, you have so much influence. And she said, my concern is that you're not going to learn to use it for good. And if you don't, and you use it for bad, I'm real worried about who you're going to turn out to be. She said, if you do figure out how to use it for good, she said, I'm really excited to see who you're going to turn out to be.
Wow.
And that was the first moment where I just remember somebody saying I had influence, and it wasn't for a good reason, but I vividly remember that. So that's always my answer. And my Aunt Eileen moved to heaven during COVID in 2020, and we got to celebrate her life just last year. But she spoke into me in a way that profoundly impacted me.
What caused you, and I don't mind going there, by the age of 10 or 11 to be going off the rails?
I would say there were 3 things, and I'm prepared for this, even though we're going down in this direction, because I just did a life history exercise with about 30 leaders last month, where I shared with them my lows and highs decade by decade, and led them through the process of identifying themes so they could understand how to best leverage their platform in the decade ahead. What has their life equipped them to do through the beautiful moments and through the painful moments? which all together make you who you are today. And it can all be so good. So for me, I just went through this and I shared it with them as an example. But for me, what caused the rebellious troublemaker was, number one, growing up Jewish in a time and in a community where there was not a lot of us. So I was born in the 60s. Now we're in the 70s. And where I grew up, there was still some form of anti-Semitism, even as a 10, 11, and 12-year-old. There were 5 Jewish kids in the school. I was early on given a nickname, BNJ, Big Nose Jew. And I was little. I was not athletic. I wasn't all that academic. So, and we moved from one neighborhood to another at about the age 10 or 11. So I had to start over again. Bottom line, you get bullied. And for being a Jewish kid and you have BNJ and you're small, you get bullied. So you can only run so many times. And then you figure out, all right, I'm in a corner, so now I'm going to fight. And then you see fighting works and you've got a lot of fear in you. So that fear, that bullying brings out a nasty side of Danny. That's number one. Number two, my parents today, 84 years old, next Wednesday, celebrating their 85th wedding anniversary, both of them dealing with some cognitive decline and living very close to me. But they're together. And I share that because if you were to look at their life when I was at that stage of life, 10 or 11, mom was a functioning alcoholic. Dad was an only child, now a father of 3. I was the oldest, and he was a bit on the passive side. So, I had mom coming home and not being in the best of shape, and that was embarrassing with my friends, et cetera, and not seeing dad jump in. And me being the oldest of 3, I had to jump into, I think, an adult role way before I was ready.
Wow.
And that caused anger. So I think that would be the second thing. And the third thing is that every human needs to belong. And if you don't belong to the athletic crew and you don't belong to the academic crew, and you're only one of, say, 5 who are Jewish, and now you're fighting and you're pushing the edge to fit in and belong somewhere, who you will belong to are those that will accept you. And if you're a troublemaker, well, then the troublemakers will accept you and they'll protect you. So my posse became really rough kids. And if you were to look at my early posse, this is a story in itself. I'll tell you about it if you have any interest, because it's a cool story. But my crew of friends before that crew, some of them turned out to be heroin addicts. Some of them are still in jail. And I don't even know if they're all still alive, but they were trouble. I mean, trouble. Yeah.
When I want to hear about, it says hooligan, right? It says those of you watching can see it.
Yes. Hooligans. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about hooligan.
Okay. So I started skateboarding and surfing at around 13, 14, 15. That changed my community. So now I started hanging out with a neighborhood kid, Greg Gutierrez. Greg, I love you, and you saved my life. Greg's about 5 years older than me, and he lived across the street, and he drove a VW van, and he would take me to the beach, and he was trouble as well, and trouble. A big posse of surfers that were all 4 or 5 years older took me in and 2 other guys in that were all young, and they let us belong. So I started to belong to this crew of surfers, and they were good guys, but partiers, surfers, and I was a drummer. So I'm a surfer and a drummer, and that became my next tribe. We got into trouble, but it wasn't mean trouble. It was adventure trouble. Mean trouble was probably, age 9, 10 through 13 or so. And then I started to get into just adventure trouble, which is still trouble. But the story of the hooligans is that today, the majority of us have all had our lives transformed. We all had big crises of faith when we got into our teen and 20s, and we're a tight crew. I mean, this morning there have been text messages going around. There's 11 of us that we surf together all the time. A big group of them moved over to Maui, which is where I live part-time. And now they're all in San Diego, Orange County area. But they're some of my tightest of brothers, and they're in there. We're all grandpas. We're all in our late 50s and 60s, and we grew up together. So it's really cool.
What was your crisis of faith? What was the turnaround for you?
So mine was being both parents Jewish, all grandparents, bar mitzvahed to please grandparents, but really not a practicing Jewish kid. I had all sorts of evangelists, just crazy Jesus freaks that would always approach me growing up. I had a girlfriend that was as sweet as could be. And I fell for this gal at the age of 11, first day of sixth grade. She wanted nothing to do with me until we turned 16. And then she said, yes, she would date me. And during our dating years, between 16 and probably 18 or 19, her faith became really legit and strong. And she wrestled between adventurous, no God Danny and her Messiah. And it was a wrestling match because she loved us both. But my lifestyle was pretty, it was in opposition to what a good Christian's lifestyle was.
Sure.
She ended up breaking up with me. We broke up probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 times during an 8-year dating period, but she broke up with me. We were separated for a year. I had a flourishing career going as a young 20-year-old and making a lot of money, had my own house, drove the fancy cars, had a wonderful career track, was partying a lot, adventuring a lot with women, etc. And then I was in a skiing accident, and the skiing accident caused me to have 3 knee surgeries, caused me to be laid up. And there were a few of my friends that had been wild men that came to faith before me. Sherry would always share the gospel with me. She would introduce me to Holocaust surviving, Messianic, amazing older folks. There was a pastor in California, Raul Reese, who was also a surfer, and I would surf with him and talk to him. And there were just so many different people put into my life and that were praying for me. And her parents should have probably destroyed me as a result of who I was to their daughter. But when I was in the skiing accident and recuperating, living in my own home, not able to do anything because I was strapped to a machine on my bed to keep my leg moving, Sherry and I were broken up, and her parents would come over and they would care for me. And I just saw so much love and goodness in Christian people. So the challenge to me was always, hey, do you know Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? And I would always say, hey, don't worry about me. I'm chosen. I'm Jewish. But I didn't know what that meant. So over the years, enough people had shared with me their journeys. When I was in the skiing accident in 1987, with my career going, I decided, being laid up with nothing to do, not the fun party guy anymore, not able to go to work, etc. I decided to get into the Hebrew scriptures, and I knew where to read. I had spent enough time with Messianic Jews. So Genesis to the Psalms, and then to the most profound book in the scriptures for me is Isaiah. And Isaiah spoke to me, and it just caused me to have a real crisis of faith where I either believe in God or I don't. And then if I believe in God, who is he? If I don't believe in God, then I'm a random accident. And what's the meaning? Well, I do believe in God, and all right, so he's the God of the Jews. Well, what does that mean? What are we chosen for? And I just followed that through, and then realized the Jews were chosen to have relationship with God first. And through the Jews came the Messiah. And boy, he fit the bill when you read Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 9:6. It was like, why don't more of us Jewish people believe? And what are we waiting for? Like, what Messiah are we waiting for? If it's not this guy, what the heck? King David on a horse? I don't see it. So April 1987, surrendered, completely changed my life. And I'll tell you, buddy, that was the most single, profound, amazing, life-changing decision ever. Carey, you know that. You know
Incredible.
that.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. What were you doing in your early 20s that
I was in mortgage banking?
You were okay. And how did you channel your pain? Because it sounds like you were in a moment where it could have gone gangs and drugs, or it could have gone, quote, success. How did you channel that into something that kept you out of prison?
Yeah, so I don't know if I would have said gangs. I look at age 13 and under. Okay, there I could have wound up in real trouble. But 13 to 22, I would have just wound up as an addict. And, I would have wound up with maybe some illegitimate kids running around, a whole bunch of little BNJs. So, but I think what happened was I had a pretty wealthy extended family. And I always had a very, very real work ethic. So I had window washing jobs, poop scooping jobs when I was 14, 15. I was helping out entrepreneurs with their home businesses, 15, 16. I always worked in construction and restaurants. I lived for a summer with an uncle who owned a big construction company, and I learned how to really work. And then I bought my first rental home when I was like 18 years old. And when I was working at a restaurant while working construction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the CEO of a mortgage firm who was a father to a friend of my younger brother's, he saw me and he saw something good in me, and he saw that I was a hard worker and that I had the ability to connect with other humans, and kind of paved the way for me to get into that. So I was in office supplies, printing, and office furniture while going to a community college when he swooped me and said, "You don't need to continue with the college route." He said, "I own 6 companies and I went to the same community college you do, and I guarantee you I can set you on a path from a career perspective that you won't regret." And he sure did.
Here you are. Well, one of the things that you write about and talk about, and you coach leaders around the world now, Daniel, as well as being an author and a speaker. But you believe that self-leadership precedes leadership. Can you talk more about that? What do you mean by self-leadership? I think it's a term we all kind of know, but let's drill down on it. How do you lead yourself?
Yeah. So it's I have been saying for almost 3 decades now, self-leadership always precedes team leadership, and team leadership always precedes organizational leadership. And if you really want to clarify it, it's self-leadership before team effectiveness before organizational impact. When I'm working with executives or when our team of coaches at Building Champions are working with executives and leaders, we start with the inside of who you are, because who you are impacts how you show up and what you do.
Right.
So it's an internal gear job. This is where transformation takes place, right in the center of who you are. It's your identity. It's what you think about. It's what you believe and how you feel. That internal gear, thinking, feeling, and believing, all circling around identity, who you are, why you're here, what's your purpose. All of that impacts an outer gear, which is relationships, actions, and competencies. Those relationships, those habits or actions, and those competencies all circle around the center of that outer gear, and that is results. So that inner gear, identity, feeling, thinking, believing, and feeling, is directly linking to the results that you get, because that inner gear fuels the energy and the attention that you focus on your competencies, your skill sets, the relationships, and how you interact with fellow humans. And then your habits or repeatable actions over and over, the things that you do that make you who you are, that outer gear is just completely impacted by that inner gear. Self-leadership. What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about you? What do I believe about the future? What do I believe about the business? How am I elevating my thinking? How am I challenging my beliefs? Feelings always true, but the narrative causing them not necessarily true, nor beneficial. So we have to understand that as humans who are given the gift of emotion, all the full array of emotion, the fears and the happiness and the joy and the anger and the passion and the love and the selfishness and the insecurity and all the fears, right? All of the emotions, they're all real. But that narrative needs some work. So when we work with leaders, we really want to get to know who's on the inside, and then we want to help them to elevate their thinking, their believing, their feeling, so that when they show up, they're present and they're the best they can be. And we want to understand that those leaders are multidimensional. Most leaders, now having done this for 30 years, most leaders, without having some sort of an external input, such as what we do, they'll put so much energy, they'll put decades of energy into just their career account, that one area of their life, and maybe some other energy into a hobby or maybe into their finances.
Right.
But they have all of these different accounts in their life that, if neglected, will rob them of the goodness of life, which then impacts how they show up at work, which impacts who they are. It impacts the conscious and subconscious levels of engagement that their team has with them, which impacts how they lead the organization. So we're always working in all dimensions, but how you lead yourself matters because people are watching and they're feeling. They feel how you show up. They catch you. Are you worth catching?
Yeah, and you kind of are contagious, right? Whether you want to be or not. Yeah. Your attitude, cultivated, not cultivated, genuine, not genuine, self-aware, not self-aware, it catches on. How did you, because like all of us, I think we all have a journey into our young adulthood. How did you become aware of self-leadership, and then how did you begin to lead yourself out of that place you found yourself with the crisis of faith, et cetera?
Now, Carey, I think that it's a pretty common story, and it's an unfortunate story, but gosh, is it helpful. I was just with a young man today. I went for a run with a young man from the East Coast. He's dating a daughter of one of our executive level clients, and he wanted to spend an hour with me this morning. So we went for a little trail run, and we were talking about this. And what we were talking about is so much gets learned through bad instruction.
Yes.
It's bad modeling. So I learned who I didn't want to be as a result of having some just crappy leaders. And, you look at how some of these leaders led themselves in their lives. And I just was like, ooh, I don't want to turn out to be that. I don't ever want to be that. And I could see how alluring it is. They would pull in Ferraris, or they would pull in the Porsches or the Maseratis, and they had the beautiful homes, and they were very respected in the professional realm. But when you really looked and you understood that, maybe some of their kids couldn't stand them. And you understood that a lot of their net worth was going to spouse number one or number two. And you saw the white powder marks in the nose, and the late mornings, and the foggy, and you just learned so much about that. And then you see it come out in ways that push really talented, hungry people down, or whatever the inner gear problems are, the identity challenges and the feelings. And you just go, I'm going to do better than that. So I started doing better that when I was given my first opportunity to lead at the age 23. And I became a coaching leader before there was such a thing, and later wrote a book about that, like in, I think, 2005 or 7 or something like that. But that's what led me into an industry that wasn't there. There was no such thing as a coaching industry. But my version of leading myself, and when I saw how I could lead myself in ways that would benefit other people, and it would cause them to be better versions of themselves, I thought, man, this is really important. It's the foundation for real transformation and impact for a leader.
What are some other mistakes you see in the self-leadership space? Some bad advice, not just bad examples, but like bad advice or bad ways to start? Because I think all of us, I realized a long time ago, I've got to lead myself. And as I lead myself, so I lead my family, my children, my team, the impact that we have. And it's a tough journey. As you probably heard said a million times, I'm the hardest person I have to lead, right? Reflecting on oneself. What is some other bad advice out there on self-leadership that you've seen?
Bad advice. Carey, I've definitely heard leaders say that in order for you to be an effective leader, this becomes your primary and your number one. And if you don't give this 110%, meaning your career, your church, your business, whatever it is, if you don't give it 110%, you won't make it. And I actually don't believe you can give anything 110%. If you understand math, you can only give 100%. And that's it. 100% is full. It's complete. And I think that many leaders will believe that they can self-sacrifice or sacrifice the areas of their life until they get to a certain point. But then once they get to that point, then it will be different. Then they'll start really caring for her. Then they'll start really caring for themselves. Then they'll start to focus on them. As soon as the business or the church or the whatever it is get to this certain point, But the truth of the matter is success begets success. So there's always a new opportunity and always a new challenge. So you have to develop your rhythm and your way that will enable you to be who you want to be in all areas of your life. And then out of really doing that work of figuring out who you want to be, then you can start to architect what you need to do to be that person. So the advice is just self-sacrifice until you get to this stage. Hey, Psalm 90:12, teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. There's no guarantee of tomorrow. So architect who you need to be and who you need to be in the areas where you need to steward in very unique roles. You and only you can steward your relationships or how you care for these areas of your life. Nobody else can do it for you. Architect that with intentionality today, because today is it. I mean, yeah.
How do you get through to a young, driven leader? What you're describing there reminds me of me when I was in my 30s. And as I said before we hit record, a big hinge point in my life came at 40, 41 when I hit burnout. And prior to that, I was leading a rapidly growing church. Definitely not a horrendous husband or father, but definitely work came first. Work came first. I was at my kids' game, but I was either always on my phone, on my laptop, preoccupied, thinking about work, and really at that season in my life for that decade, addicted to the results at work. And it felt chaotic at home. So if it felt chaotic at home, I just went back to work. If you were to sit down with 30-year-old me, how would you coach me out of that situation? God did it through arresting me at 41, basically sucking all the energy out of me. I burned out. I was depressed. And God's like, well, now do I have your attention? Okay, great. Let's go on this reconstruction journey. And that's been the last 17, 18 years of my life. So very grateful for that. I can say that now. I'm grateful that I burned out. But hey, in a perfect world, I would have loved an earlier intervention. And it's not that people didn't try to intervene. I don't think I was that interested in listening. Any advice for the 30-year-old me or the 30-year-old leader who's heading down that trail right now before something bad happens that you may or may not recover from?
Yeah. So here's a little shameless plug, because I'm going to try to help your listeners, should they even be younger than 30 or should they have kids younger than 30. You want to check out setpath.org. I am just launching a not-for-profit to help America's young adults to transfer purpose, belief, and direction through free life planning and mentorship, because I've had way too many people ask me that exact same question. In 2016, I wrote a book with a friend and longtime client, Michael Hyatt. We wrote Living Forward, and that's a life planning process. And in the beginning of that process, in the beginning of that book, what I have every individual do is I have them write out their eulogy as if they were to die today. And if I'm talking to a 30-year-old, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, tell me, if you're to pass away today, I want you to tell me who's sitting in the reserved rows at your memorial. I want to know who's in row 1 and who's in row 2. There's a rope, a banister that says reserved. And those are for the people that your loss will be significant, because you're the only you. You're the only first son. You're the only older brother. You're the only husband or the only wife. You're the only dad. You are the only to those people, usually in the first 1 or 2 rows. And what I want you to do is I want you to now tell me, what would they say about you if they're attending your memorial today at 3:30 p.m.? Now I want you to go write it out. And the reason I would have people do that is because I want them to come to grips with the fact that there is no guarantee of tomorrow. And I would take them back to that Psalm 90:12, because I think that so often we can buy the lie that we can just get to that other stuff later. And Carey, one of the greatest blessings, which I would have never seen as a blessing, is that I have been with friends as they've passed away at young ages. In 1998, I had 2 friends die in front of me at different times, one from cancer and one from a heart attack. And both of them were 38 years old. And one of them, their wife, Brian, his wife and his kids were all staying at my house with other wives and kids, as me and a group of guys were at a men's retreat. And, boom, he passed right there. And another time, one of my very dear friends that I used to work construction with, and then I worked in mortgage banking with. I was with him, journeying as he was making his way from here to heaven. And what you see is, there is no guarantee of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I do my best to help people deal with the fact that you need to be keenly aware. Moses was the one saying, "Teach me to number my days so that I may gain a heart of wisdom," not a head of wisdom. The head's so easily deceived, right? But a conviction, a heart of wisdom. I want to know my days are numbered. So what I would do to help a young leader to avoid the burnout is I would say, "Hey, listen, you're going to blink. And there's no guarantee you get 82 years. Like, there's just no guarantee. So let's come to grips with the end. Let's put that destination spot in there and let's marinate your heart. Now let's start to do some thinking and head work to help you to make decisions day after day that will enable you to avoid burnout, to avoid regret, to avoid a train wreck." Because the drift, when it comes in, it's just kind of this, subtle, I'm not going to be mean or abusive. I'm not going to be intentionally neglectful. But as you said, it's harder at home. You don't get the accolades. You're not the rock star pastor. You're not the rock star business leader. You're not, slaughtering the big deal or building the big, beautiful structure. You're your dad. And, it's like, go scoop the poop and clean the dishes, and do homework with little Dylan, and do this and do that and do this. And then there's nothing left over for you. And hey, that's life. I mean, it's in this life, you will suffer. We suffer and we experience the joys and the richness.
Do you find that's usually a sobering and arresting moment for leaders to imagine who's on that front row?
Oh, yeah.
That really gets
Oh,
people.
Yeah. I've been doing that. I will actually, when I'm speaking to a large room on the topic, if I'm walking a group through life planning, I mean, I'll show them. I'm like, up here is a 6'5" box, and it's mahogany, and you're in it. And then I'll get off the stage and I'll walk them through it, and I'll just, Rose, here's my mom and there's my dad. They didn't expect to lose their son. There's my brother and my sister. They didn't expect it. I will just, and then I have them go write it out, and you'll just see people. They're broken. They're in tears because what's being said in rows 1 and 2 today is not what they would want for many of them. I say, hey, what we do is we spend all of our energy giving our best to those in rows 20, 25, row 30. We're so wrapped around the axle around what they think about us and how we're treating them. And then when we get home exhausted, what do we give to those in rows 1 and 2? And everybody always answers the same way. You spend it all day long giving it to rows 25 through 35. You get home, you're exhausted. What do you give to your rows 1 and 2? Take a guess at what everybody says. Fumes, leftovers.
Yep.
Like, oh, cool. The one that you said, till death do we part. That's what she signed up for. Hey, give me a life of leftovers. You make these little ones with your last name. Hey, I'll tell you what, I brought you into the world, and what you're going to get are leftovers. Fumes.
This is a bit of a diversion, but I was having a conversation yesterday with my assistant. And, there's a lot of leaders, and I'm sure you have this, I have this, who have a ton of inbound, more opportunities than you have hours in the day, days in the week, etc. I'd love to say yes to everything. I just can't. We get overwhelmed. And my staff is so good at paring down the ones that I need to see. I don't even know what I don't see. But even when I finally see that final list that comes to me, I still have to say no most of the time. And there was one thing I said yes to, and because I really wanted to do it for years. I won't say what it was because the guy's a friend, but I really wanted to do it. We were going to have an incredible experience at this event. And then I kind of looked at, we're going out to BC to be with my oldest son. I would have to either cut that short, or the flights to get to where I would need to be, it's going to be like a 20-hour trip. And that was no way for me to spend the rest of that week. I'd show up exhausted. I'd be tired. It'd be a late night event. So I said, you know what, to my assistant, I don't think I can do that. So can you undo my yes? And she said, yeah, I'll take care of that. And so she did. And I was in a meeting with her yesterday. And I said, did you hear anything from the fact that I'm not going to be attending this big conference? And she's like, no, really nothing. And, if I don't know why at this stage in life, Daniel, but it hit me. It's like, it's so hard to say no. But to them, if you're hosting a big party, let's just say, and this is the analogy I used in my head, if I'm hosting a big party and I'm inviting 75 people and one person says, oh, my spouse and I, we can't make it. I'd be like, oh, that's really too bad. But the party's going to go on.
Right.
And I think too often in my head, I'm like, oh, I can't really say no because they've invited me multiple times and I really wanted to go. And no. The amount of emotional energy I put into that no was way bigger than probably what they felt on the other end. Anyway, I don't know whether there's anything there, but I talk to leaders who are overburdened all the time.
Yeah.
And we're just so afraid of disappointing people. But what I got to say yes to is now I'm on the flight home with my younger son and his wife and my wife. And we're going to be relaxed. And we're going to get into the airport. And I'm going to show up at work refreshed after this vacation.
Good choice.
Any comments on that?
Oh, gosh, yes.
Okay, go.
Yeah. So if you hang out with me, you'll hear I'm not all that creative and there's not a lot original. You'll hear me repeat things over and over and over again. And one of the Danielisms, I'm always saying it, is you have to say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be wrestling with, oh, it's a really bad opportunity. Should I do it?
Yes.
Right?
This was 80,000 people and I got to be a part of it, right? It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Good. Saying no to this is good.
Yeah.
So you can say yes to the great. You invested time with, in this moment, those that you believed you would make the greatest difference with, you would enjoy most, you would remember most. But it took courage. You said no because you knew what mattered most. All right, that's number one. I'm thinking back to young leaders that I've mentored, and there's one in particular whom I love dearly. His name's Pete Fisher, and he owns a company called Human Investing, and they're just phenomenal. He's a neighbor of mine, and yeah, he's a good brother. Good brother. He's actually officiating my daughter's wedding in 2 weeks.
Oh, wonderful.
But Pete, when he was young, he would always meet with me for coffee, and he'd open his journal, and he would just this guy's a driver, man. He would open his journal. Okay, I've got question. And he would just unload on me while we'd have coffee. And sometimes the questions were about marriage, and other times about owning a company, and other times about leadership, and other times about parenting and faith and whatever. And it was always a great ride. I love spending time with him because he's so hungry. I remember being young and he was starting to really get to levels of success where he just had more requests than he had space. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard. And I've walked through this with many leaders, many thought leaders. Some of the guests that you've had on your podcast have been my clients. And
I'm sure, you look at it. It's like, hey, how'd you get into my contact card?
It's great. Yeah. And I sit there and I go, well, we talked about how do you deal with just the sheer volume of requests? And what I remember telling Pete was, hey, Pete, get really comfortable disappointing people. I disappoint people every day. Every day I go to sleep knowing I have disappointed people. I do it every day. I do it 7 days a week. I disappoint people. The magic is that I do everything I can not to disappoint the wrong people.
Right.
And you have to think about that.
Yeah.
And then that connects
Let's talk
back to
about
the
right
first three
versus
rows.
wrong.
Yeah.
How do you determine that? What's your filter? What are some helpful filters for us to think about?
Yeah. So, we'll use that life planning process. If you made my life plan, well, you're the right people. I mean, if you're on my life plan, it means that I play a unique stewardship role. I said yes forever, regardless of circumstances. I said yes till death do we part. I'm yours. That's a pretty big commitment. That commitment trumps every other commitment. That commitment trumps every other commitment. Hey, Daniel, do you want to come do this event and take this contract on? And yeah, you'll be away from your family all of these times, and you'll be away from her, and it's going to exhaust you, but you're going to make a few extra blankety blank dollars. Well, no. If it's going to hurt her, my number one, then no. So we have to figure that out together. And then when I decided to have fun with my wife and we made babies, there came with that a responsibility. And they all are now my responsibility to train up That's my job. That's not the school's job. That's not the youth leader's job. That's not the community, leader's job. That's not their friend's job. My job is train them up the way they should go. That's mine. Really clear. That takes time. That takes energy. That takes intentionality. Now, to do all of that, I need to take really good care of me because I need energy every day. Like my superpower strength is energy. If I have energy, then I can listen. If I have energy, then I can deploy curiosity and I can ask questions and I can engage. If I have energy, I can play with grandbabies. If I have energy, I can bring what I need to bring to the areas of my life that are most important. So how do we figure out who to disappoint and who not to disappoint? Well, if you're on my life plan, you're a not disappoint. My band of brothers, my hooligan boys, and don't disappoint them. Now, I can disappoint them if they come in and say, hey, can you do this? But I've got a commitment with Sherry or the kids or with my job, which is an important part of what I do. I don't sit there and I signed up as a leader and I have to serve as a CEO, the mission of the job. But that's a whole different topic because a CEO really doesn't do a lot. A CEO helps align and has amazingly smart, gifted people that do a lot. And so that's a whole different topic. But you just know who are in the first few rows. And then every situation's different. You don't become dogmatic with, oh, I always say no to these events, or I always say no to these people. No, I pray. And sometimes I talk to my bride, and sometimes I talk to my team, and sometimes I count the cost and I ask for permission to be absent so that I can go do this, but I'm crystal clear it's a one and done.
Yeah.
And sometimes I make mistakes, and sometimes I say yes to the wrong things, and sometimes I have to say I'm sorry, and sometimes I let the pride of the opportunity and it's big, and I make it bigger than it is, and I screw up. So.
I make it bigger than it is. Too true. Yeah. Anxious or interested to know, you coach a lot of people, including some of the top leaders like Fortune 500 CEOs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you've been pretty much everywhere. When you look at really high capacity, high functioning leaders versus leaders who are floundering a little bit more, always overwhelmed, what are the differences that you see between the best of the best and the rest?
I cannot believe who I get to hang out with. So I'm going to share some of these names because of who they are and what they've taught me. My job, I can't believe I get to sit front row in a classroom learning from these folks. So, I think of a guy like Frank Blake, who's the chairman of Delta, and we had breakfast last Friday, and he's part of my CEO roundtable. He's amazing. Frank was the CEO of Home Depot for years, and he's truly one of the most remarkable leaders. But I just think humility, like he's just so humble. You would never know. So humble. Tim Tassopoulos, who is now leaving his post at Chick-fil-A. I just went to his retirement gala last Friday. We had dinner 2 weeks before that. He's been a client and friend for probably 15 plus years, and humble and wicked smart. And what I admire about him is he knows everybody. People matter. He understands, and he actually teaches results and relationships are these two axes on which leadership effectiveness is dependent upon. My last book, I say it's decision-making and influence. You got to be wicked smart, and you have to be keenly aware of the influence game and how you connect with other humans. You say it differently, but it's the same thing. I think that in today's times where things are changing so quickly, yes, you need to be humble, and yes, you need to be caring. You need to be focused on a better tomorrow. You need to believe and see a better tomorrow. There has to be a compelling vision and a clear vision. And then you need so much curiosity, and I call it intentional curiosity, because everything's so complicated today. There's nuances to supply chain if you're in manufacturing that are present today that weren't here in 2019. 2020 and COVID and everything just so radically impacted dependencies on little teeny parts that if you don't have them, you don't ship billions of dollars worth of product. And there's just these complexities. And then you have technology, and now everyone is tripping out on AI. And how do you tune the information in AI in such a way that it really gives you a competitive advantage? How do you tune and test?
Mm-hmm.
So curiosity, lifelong learning, appetite to learn. The best of the best do that.
Yeah, that's an interesting list of characteristics. And yeah, I'm trying to form my next question. And maybe this is a good dovetail into your last book, where you talked about 7 perspectives of effective leadership. Are there any other qualities? Because I think that's a pretty comprehensive list, and it really resonates. It was Jim Collins who famously argued with his researchers that there's no way humility, bless you, there's no way humility could be a factor in the difference between a level 4 and what he would go on to call a level 5 leader. And then he looked at the data and he's like, yeah, the very best of the best actually are humble. Humility is a tangible benefit. But when you look at the 7 practices of effective leadership, are there a couple that come to mind in the context of separating the best of the best from the rest?
So each of those perspectives require intentional curiosity. Real quick flyby for those who've not read the book or aren't familiar with it. The whole premise is that a leader's effectiveness is determined by just 2 things: the decisions they make and the influence they have. End of story. I sat down with 25 leaders, from Frank Blake to Tim Tassopoulos to Horst Schulze to Martin Daum I could go on and on and on. Incredibly successful leaders who are, they're down the road in their game. These are men and women who they're not going anywhere. And I asked him, I said, just challenge me. Is leadership more complicated than decisions and influence? If not to be a good leader, but to be an effective leader. Like, a good leader comes before. You have to have Horst Schulze, who is one of the founders of, for Horst.
He's been on the show a few times, and he's a really fascinating person to spend time with, particularly as someone in his 80s. My goodness, you meet that guy for breakfast.
Oh yeah.
He's like, and I've already got like a 5-kilometer walk in, and I'm like, Horst, it's 8 a.m.
Oh yeah, he's a beast.
Yeah.
And he is so good. He's part of our round table as well. And that guy just lights the room up every time he speaks. But, Horst, he was the only one that challenged me. He was like, no, Daniel, you need to have integrity. And I'm like, no, Horst. You need to have integrity to be a good leader, right? You need to have integrity, and you need to have character, and you need to have work ethic, and you need to have brilliance. You need to have all of that to be a good leader. But I want to talk about effective, right? Because there's all sorts of good leaders. They were really good, but they don't move the needle in ways that are required of them by shareholders, by constituents. Like, you need to be effective. You need to get stuff done. All right. So you bring this intentional curiosity, because no leader knows it all. You bring intentional curiosity, which then grows your influence and elevates your decision-making authority. In order to do that, you need to see the business from at least 7 different perspectives. Current reality, perspective 1. If you don't fully understand the historical that got the business to where it's at today, as well as the business today, and even in the year ahead, well, then what happens is your ivory tower. And you may be making decisions and saying things, but your team's doing workarounds because you don't get it. You're too disconnected, right? So your starting point in your GPS is faulty. Therefore, all directions that go from that perspective to the next perspective are off. Your starting point's off. Perspective 2, vision. If you don't have a clear and compelling vision that promises for a better tomorrow, that causes you to want to take risk, that causes others to want to take risk, and if it's not clear enough to build strategy to, then you're missing one of the core elements of leadership. A great leader, an effective leader, says there is true north. This is what it will look like, taste like, and feel like when we get there. This is who we will become. This is what the people who work with us will belong to, and that's what we're going to build. And you address those in vision. Once you have those 2 perspectives, you have an opportunity gap. Current reality is here, where we are in 2024. Long-term vision is where we'll be in 2034. Well, now we need strategy to move us there. So we make strategic bets grounded in current reality, anchored in long-term vision, so that we pull the organization forward. Those strategic bets are informed by those 2 waypoints, but we don't stop there. We move to perspective 4, and that is team. Not telling the team, but asking the team, what do you think? What do you see? What do you need? What do I need to hear? The fourth perspective, the team's giving you the input because they're closest to the work. They understand the technology. They understand the customer. They understand the supply chain. They understand the legislative compliance issues. They get it. So you're asking and asking and asking. And you're asking the questions and really listening. And then you're thinking about those responses. Now, that fourth perspective, without the fifth perspective, is a miss. And a lot of leaders don't really nail the fifth perspective, which is the customer. What does the customer really think about your business? Not just today, but what are they thinking about your business for 3, 4, 5 years down the road? What are they thinking about for their business? If you're in a B2B business, how can your business be working today to help them solve problems that are 5 years down the road? You don't trust surveys. Surveys give you one bit of input. You talk to the people. If you're in a B2C business, you're actually spending time with the client, with the consumer, and you're studying them and understanding them and figuring out what it is that would better serve them today and what will better serve them tomorrow. And I have so many stories on great leaders that do this. The sixth perspective is your role. How do you need to be changing and growing? And then the seventh perspective, changing and growing to be not only the best leader today, but the leader that the vision will require you to be in the years ahead. And then the seventh perspective is the outsider. And what outsiders do you have that are helping you to think about all of this so that you can become that leader and get it all done? Those perspectives will help you to be more effective by improving decision-making and elevating influence.
There's a lot there. I want to drill down on a couple of things. One of them is intentional curiosity. So in that burnout season of my life, I realized I had become very cynical, and it's been a goal and habit of mine to become very curious, intentionally curious, and hopefully more curious every year, not more closed, but more open. And I'm with you. I feel like, how is this even my life? How do I get to do this? But one of my favorite things is to talk to world experts on this podcast and just ask questions. So for someone who, because I don't know whether you find this or not, but I find age and cynicism are frequent companions. In other words, the older I get, uncorrected, the more cynical I will become. Because cynicism is rooted in knowledge, right? It's like, oh, I know how that works. Let me tell you why it's not going to work, Daniel.
Been there, done that.
Because you have this, been there, done that. Yep, not going to work. And so I've tried to be open and curious. What are some good habits you've noticed, either in yourself or in others, to foster the discipline, the practice of intentional curiosity?
I think that humility to know that actually you know so little. You just know so little. Carey, I was 46 years old when I was doing my end of year reflection time. I do a Sabbath at the end of the year, kind of this little getaway where I look at my life plan. I look for the themes of last year. I pray. I look to learn. And your listeners may not like my lesson at age 46. I've shared it with many, but the lesson at 46 was, hey, Daniel, you're a dumbass. And I don't say that for shock value. That is really what I felt like I understood. And the reason that I share that is because it was probably one of the best year-end messages that I've ever come to grips with. Because if I ever believe that I'm supposed to have all the answers, I'll move into a poser and a performer mindset to where I'll actually believe that I need to have all the answers and that my value to you has to do with my knowledge, my comprehensive knowledge of all things and all topics. I can speak about a few things with some level of confidence and expertise, but not a lot of them. I don't have a ton of knowledge in many areas. Like, don't put me into an operating room and don't get me into politics and don't put me into the front row of a sports event and don't get me to comment on opera. And, that's not me. I mean, I am fine tuning my competence, my knowledge, my interests where I believe I can move the needle most. And I say no to a lot of other things, and it's okay. And there's so much for me to learn. Things are changing so fast. Now, the beauty of that is if I don't need to know everything, well, then what I get to do is I get to surround myself with people who are smarter than me in different areas. And I just need to ask them a lot of questions. And if I can align them all together, well, then together we can accomplish great things. And that's a leader's job. A leader's job isn't to know it all, to be it all, and to do it all. A leader's job is to surround themselves with the best people, to cast a vision that's clear and compelling, and then to resource and coach the heck out of them so that together they can accomplish something together that none of them could ever do on their own.
You mentioned listening to the customer, which we're taking really seriously. We hired a couple of leaders to help us really listen to people in the Art of Leadership Academy. And literally, Daniel, this afternoon, I sat down and read about an hour worth of feedback from customers in the Art of Leadership Academy. It was way more affirming than I thought. And that was based on hours of interviews that our research team has done with our actual customers. And I've heard Frank Blake on different podcasts talk about walking the stores in home when he was CEO of Home Depot, like just showing up at
every Saturday.
Yep. Home Depot in Detroit. I'm walking the stores, meeting the actual customer service people there, having conversations with them. And they were shocked to see a CEO do that. Here's my question. A lot of us feel like we hear from people is what I'm trying to say, because we get emails. They tend to be angry emails, customer service emails, or we get congregants who are upset about this or want that, and a lot of noise on social media. How do you figure out how to listen to the right customers in today's environment?
You know, the process of figuring out who the right customers are could actually come out of a bias, which could be dangerous.
Yep.
You know, the right customers are the ones that tell me that our company is amazing. I like those meetings a lot more than those that say, you know, you're not quite as good as you used to be. You know, 25 years ago, you were it. Well, you got a lot of competition today. You're going to need to up your game. That's not a fun meeting, right? So I think there's value in hearing from everybody. Now, I will say social media as a channel to hear from the customer needs to consume just a few of 10% or less of your customer interface. It's pretty easy to be emboldened to say things behind an iPhone, you know, with your thumbs. But sitting down and having a real conversation with somebody, breaking bread with them, going for a walk with them, going to their place, taking them fishing, doing something with them, you will hear things by the investment of time that you would never hear from a survey or a social media post. So I look at some of the best leaders. Those of our clients that are in manufacturing. We have a large global trucking firm. It's Daimler, Mercedes-Benz. They're in every country, and market share leaders. They're amazing. We work with their chairmen as well as their CEOs around the world, and they have a regular practice of ride and drive where they will they drive the products, and then they will go out and they will do dealer visits, and they'll just sit there and they'll talk to the customers. And it's a high payoff activity. We mentioned Chick-fil-A. Those executives are in the restaurants all the time, and they're talking to customers, and they're asking about the quality of food. And that goes from the Cathy family through Tim, through all of them. It's a regular discipline of theirs. Frank Blake with him being in the stores, Horst Schulze being in the hotels back when he was in the business, sitting down with customers and really talking to them, whether it's the B2C or the B2B. It's time. It's relationships. So much of business is relationships. Yeah, this technology is changing things, but I don't know if in our lifetimes, Carey, the relationships ever get so devalued. Maybe things do in many listeners. Maybe they're running commoditized businesses, but even commoditized businesses, I say there's a way for you to elevate through relationship.
Well, good example. I called Apple customer support twice in the last few days. Getting a new battery put in my MacBook Pro and trying to extend the life. And I had a case on it and the adhesive wouldn't come off, and it was just a nightmare. So I called Apple thinking I had destroyed my computer. It was still working, but functionally useless because there was this tacky residue all over the top and the bottom. And I'm like, this thing's done. And they're like, oh, good news. That's called cosmetic damage. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You didn't do this. I did this. And I bought an aftermarket product. It didn't work. I've never had this before. And they're like, no, we'll cover that. And I'm like, oh. And they were laughing with me and, it's going to cost me $300 total in repair. I'm like, sign me up.
Yeah.
But it was that personal touch, not the chat bot, not the customer service email with a visit our website and look at the FAQs. It was that personal touch that made the difference.
How many?
Daniel, shifting gears.
Real quick.
Go ahead.
How many listeners do you have?
On this podcast?
Yeah.
In a typical month, 500,000 or so.
Yeah. So, I'm just sitting here looking at Apple going, gosh, they're genius, right? So what'd they spend?
Yeah.
They spent a few $100s. And here you are doing a plug-in commercial for Apple and their customer service. 500,000 people. What'd they pay for that? A few $100. I'll pay for that advertising all day long.
Exactly.
Building champion.
It's a good point.
Set path. Building champion. Set path. We'll return it.
No, you're right. You're right. And the thing that I love is, you could argue when we're Apple's golden days, but that was true 20 years ago when Steve Jobs was running it, and it's true 20 years later. When Tim Cook is running it and perhaps his successor one day. And that's culture, right?
Oh, yeah.
That really is.
It's their way, man. They get it. The customers keenly get it. And
yep.
boy, oh boy, I always feel bad for the companies that are led by leaders that are, they're tripping over quarters to pick up pennies with how they treat customers. It's like, oh gosh, too bad.
And you're right. It's like, do you know how much money we could save if we laid a third of them off and made people wait? I didn't even wait on hold. It was like, by the time you're done with the prompt menu, you're right through to somebody. And they were both a delight to deal with, which is unfortunately rare these days. Daniel, I know you love the church and you work with church leaders. If there was one piece of advice you could offer to church leaders when you look at the broad landscape of what church is today, what would you tell us, caution us, encourage us in as people who are stewarded with leadership in the church?
The most significant question you've asked me, and probably the one that I'm most ill-equipped to answer. But what comes to me is be who God's called you to be and follow that calling. Because anyone who's in church leadership, and my hope is that they answered a call. And the mission is so big. And, there's a military saying, mission first, people always. If you get that backwards and you put people first, mission always, you will burn out. You will burn out. You will flame out. You will fail. Why do I say that? If you put people first, and you have meetings with 100 different congregants, and you ask them, what is it that you want from me? Well, some will say, I want you to marry the best of the best. Your marriage ceremonies need to be amazing. And somebody else will say, well, no, it's your funerals, your burials, man. They need to be the best they can be. And somebody else will say, no, you need to have like rock star image with incredible tennis shoes. And you need to be witty and you need to preach messages that make us laugh and entertain. And somebody else will go, no, don't entertain me. I want sound doctrine. I want expositional depth. And you need to go deep with me. And then somebody else will, in your elder meetings, they need to be like CEO, chairman of the board quality, your fiscal management, 3 years out, take on debt, figure out how to blow this thing through the roof. People always, but mission first. Mission straightforward. Pastor, disciple us. We're your sheep. You get to disciple us, train us up, disciple us, equip us, mobilize us, send us out, get us out there doing the work, get us out there experiencing the adventure of the gospel journey, get us going. However, he's called you to do it. In your church, it's going to be different. In his church, it's going to be different. The communities are different. The demographics are different. Be who he's called you to be. That's all I got.
That's great. Daniel, anything else that I haven't asked you that you wished I would have asked you, or anything else you want to add or say or call to action by the audience?
You're very kind. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
It's been a delight and some really interesting insights I'm going to mull over. So People are going to want to connect with you online, Daniel. Where can they find you easily these days?
Yeah, so the two organizations that I have the privilege of serving are Building Champions, which is our executive coaching firm, and then SetPath, which is our young mentoring life planning firm. And you can get to both of those by going to danielharkavy.com.
Excellent.
H-A-R.
We'll link to all that in the show notes. Yeah, you better spell it.
Yeah, H-A-R-K-A, V as in Victor Y, H-A-R-K-A-V-Y. And yeah, you'll be able to get at me that way. And if my teams and I can serve you, no matter how you're leading and doing your stuff, we'd be more than happy to.
Daniel, thank you so much.
Carey, thank you. Privileged to be spending more time with you. I look forward to another random meeting again. It's been nice running into you as of late.
Fantastic. Feel the same way.